It's a bad time to be a university right now. If you're in administration, your main goal isn't fostering innovation or excellence, it's damage control. Keep your university in the local news and away from the national spotlight. There is no shortage of criticism for these institutions, from a mental health epidemic, rampant cheating, and a steady decline in trust. Universities are really struggling to maintain their former reputations. Today, I want to cut through the noise and focus on a foundational but often overlooked question. What is a university for?
I think they use it to indoctrinate the youth. I think it's a waste of fucking time.
What, to brainwash people?
To brainwash people, of course they do.
Education has become a substitute for thinking about the future. And the K through 12 system is geared towards college. And the problem is life doesn't end in college.
There may be a question we should ask is, does our school system promote learned helplessness? Do we force kids to suffer punishment that they really can't change time and time and time again, and then we expose them to a world and say, now you go out and do what you want to do? I think to a certain degree we are doing that, School is, for a lot of kids, just a weird and unusual kind of punishment.
My favorite perspective on this comes from an author that gave one of the first and then the most famous TED Talk of all time.
If you were to visit education as an alien and say, what's it for, public education, I think you'd have to conclude, if you look at the output, who really succeeds by this? Who does everything they should? Who gets all the brownie points? Who are the winners? I think you'd have to conclude the whole purpose of public education throughout the world is to produce university professors. Isn't it? They're the people who come out the top. And I used to be one. So there,
His original talk on creativity got over 100 million views across YouTube and TED. Sir Ken Robinson's core thesis was that our education system, K through 12 and up to university, was built and designed for an industrial era. And it basically demeaned all the other skills and qualities that were not deemed necessary for it. Basically, everything that wasn't science and math and language. He compared our schools to factories, which were basically designed to channel kids into a managerial class. We have ringing bells and rigid timetables, and we even sort kids by their date of manufacture. And this increasingly competitive system takes the brightest and most disciplined and compliant students, and more of the rest of the students just get left behind. We value standardized tests above all else. Mistakes are the worst thing you can make, and getting things wrong is scary, and kids ask less questions. We pressure them to conform, and we make them dependent on external validation or number or letter grades. They become risk averse, and well-meaning parents in the competitive system, they try to do their best, and they overload their kids with homework and tutors and extracurriculars because they think it'll help their chance of social mobility and making it big in the Ivy Leagues. But Robinson's conclusion and plea for reform basically comes down to, if we actually care about our students, we have to think about schools not as factories or mechanical organizations. They have to be organic because humans are organic. If we actually cared about our students, we would divest from the bootstraps narratives and individual teachers and student accountability and all of that individualistic crap. We have to think about schools as the environments that promote critical thinking and collaboration and curiosity. But of course, nothing's really happened in the past 18 years since he's given that talk, and the conveyor belt has only gotten worse. So it only comes naturally that 18 years later, another TED speaker takes the stage and basically picks up where Robinson left off.
And here is a memo to my colleagues in higher ed. We're public servants, not fucking Chanel bags. Harvard is the best example of this. They've increased their endowment in the last 40 years and have decided to expand their enrollment, their freshman class, by 4%. Any university that doesn't grow their freshman class faster than population, that has over $1 billion in endowment, should lose their tax-free status because they're no longer in higher education, they're a hedge fund offering classes.
As a student, something that's been bothering me recently is how a significant amount of clubs I've been a part of or that I see elsewhere feel kind of hollow. It's like every time we have an intro or like an icebreaker or something, one question always comes up, and it's like, why'd you join or why are you here? And every time, half the group says something like, well, it'd look really good on my resume, or it would really help me with my grad school application. And like, just every time I hear that, like a little piece of my heart breaks. And it makes me wonder if I'm in the wrong place or maybe I'm around the wrong people. But I don't really think that, because I think part of it or most of it is really just the grind set culture that we've thrown ourselves into. Everything feels transactional, and kids are under so much pressure to be marketable and successful that it feels like they lose a big piece of themselves along the way. Another piece we lose of ourselves, I think, is just the ability to ask good questions. As our classes grow from elementary to high school to college or university, it seems like there's more and more like material to get through in shorter and shorter periods of time. And while professors will always like pay lip service to like loving questions and like curiosity, and they'll answer them if you go to them in like office hours, but like during actual like lectures, I feel like you can sometimes sense like some hostility around questions, or like they're not really given the proper time that they should be sometimes, just because there's either so much to cover, or like other students get like kind of irritated. You can almost sense if it's like near the end of the lecture and they're like trying to leave, or if they just want the professor to like end the class early. It's just, depends on the class and depends on the school, I'm sure, but I'm sure that other people can relate to the sense and the environment in these classrooms that I'm talking about, that it really stifles curiosity sometimes. This kind of soulless efficiency mindset and prior analysis by Scott Galloway leads me to believe that university is actually about a lot more than just a piece of paper. It's actually about pixels on a screen. For the cheap price of $500 a pixel, you too can have a beautiful logo for your LinkedIn page. If you're lucky, you may pay to be an ambassador associated with amazing prestige and with the same brand that churns out senators, presidents, and CEOs. While I was researching for this video, I spent a lot of time going through the citations of a David Brooks article for The Atlantic. What really struck me in Brooks' article was the Ipsos polling data about the relationship between the elite and the working class. It paints a stark picture of a divided country. According to the poll, 59% of Americans believe the country is in decline, 69% think the political and economic elite don't care about hardworking people, and 63% feel that experts don't understand their lives, and perhaps most strikingly, 66% agreed that America needs a strong leader to take the country back from the rich and powerful. And who better to do that than a New York billionaire? These numbers reveal a deep sense of alienation and resentment, and it's not really hard to see why. The so-called meritocracy has, in practice, created a new kind of caste system. College graduates are now conferred a whole host of benefits. They live longer, more likely to get married, less likely to divorce, they have more close friends, face lower obesity rates, and are less likely to die from opioid overdoses. Education has now become the dividing line in modern politics, and the divide is now one of the most powerful predictors of voting behavior. And when you look at how metropolitan centers have brain drained the best and brightest kids from rural areas and largely left those communities behind, it's no wonder we're seeing a populist backlash, not just in America, but across the world. The system was supposed to provide economic and social mobility for everyone, given that they were all willing to work for it. But in reality, it's just concentrated privilege and those who often already had it and widened the gap between those who make it and those who feel forgotten. The biggest fail point, the biggest tragedy I can point to for universities and the education system as a whole is that it's taken one of the most curious and collaborative species on the planet and it's turned them into apathetic check drones. And nearly every student despises group work. The high achievers get dumped with all the responsibility and end up resentful. The average students get their contributions dismissed by the perfectionists and they end up resentful. And then the slackers just coast through and learn nothing and end up resentful. And it's just a broken system that pits kids against each other, screws over everyone. And the worst thing is at the end of the day, it makes people think that they have no talent. I don't think I'd be able to make a really good video about universities if I didn't at least try to talk about the chilling effect. And basically, I first became interested in this topic when I read Haidt and Lukianoff's Coddling of the American Mind over COVID, and I really liked it. And I never really began to think about how it really affected my life. I thought it was more of an American thing. But I began to see my perspective change after October 7th, as far as like the university culture in Canada. I saw a flood of really bad and stupid infographics, and my university emails just got kind of flooded with invitations for screenings or mental health warnings for like pro-Palestinian documentaries. And I'm not here to litigate my opinions on the conflict. I'm just a student with like limited grasp. Like, who am I to speak on what's going on? But I mostly looked at it as like an issue as a really like illustrative issue for how the chilling effect works. Like, the best example I have is in some of my classes, even like foreign policy classes, like I really feel that I wouldn't be able to state my actual opinion that I don't think Israel's committing a genocide, and that I'd still be like extremely critical of Netanyahu and maybe the lack of pressure applied to him. But like I don't even think I'd be able to get that last part out without being kind of like jumped on or whatever. Like the climate just becomes kind of hostile, and it seems like only those with like the most extreme opinions really have the confidence to speak up, which I think is pretty dangerous. So like I never really said anything about it, not in class. Like I just kind of kept my head down and wrote some things down. But now I'm realizing just like how bad that kind of culture is. And it's not just Israel-Palestine. I've seen it with other topics too, as far as like free speech or the issue of gender identity and how to talk about immigration and religion and incorporate it into our current perspectives. I feel like university in theory is supposed to be, at least it's so it's advertised to me, like it's supposed to be like the best place to have these kinds of conversations. Like, I know we can't talk about it at the dinner table, or you don't talk about it at work, which is another issue entirely. But like if you can't even talk about it at university, then then what's the point? Like what are we building these multi-billion dollar campuses for if we can't have civil conversations. And like the cost benefit analysis for some of this stuff, like it really doesn't feel like you get a lot out of for it. Like why would I talk about my opinions in class if I feel like it would like kind of ostracize me? Like I don't think I would get many friends, or like I'd be worried about what my friends or classmates or even professors think of me. And so like what's the point? I would just sound like a contrarian trying to like get attention or something, but I'm not really. But anyways, the chilling effect is isolating. Like I feel in these classrooms, and it really sucks to kind of just sit there and to like have something that you think is interesting or try to contribute to the conversation, but you know you just like can't, or you're too scared to. And then you don't, and then you become weaker for it, and you become scared, and it just really sucks. But all is not lost. There's still a couple things I'm optimistic about as far as potential solutions. One of the things is the Carnegie Foundation's launched a new sort of a pilot program to try and move past the Carnegie unit, which is basically our credit hours. It's why everything's divided into semesters and like 120-hour courses or whatnot. And they're trying to basically follow Robinson's line of thinking and develop a new kind of skills assessment program that can evaluate students beyond what we do currently with standardized testing. They want to try and capture abilities like cooperation and resilience and curiosity and critical thinking, the kinds of abilities that are way harder to measure. So it makes sense why there's so much resistance to it, because standardized testing is definitely way easier. But just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean that we shouldn't try doing it. So that's something I'm optimistic about. Another thing I can see that would be really helpful for professors is, I think it kind of comes to them, to the faculty, to really try and model the behavior. You need sort of a top-down and bottom-up approach. Not really sure about that, but I think one of the things that professors can do for the height side of things is model open inquiry. I think they should be more vocal about times when they've like changed their mind, or like interesting devil's advocate positions. I think one thing that's really underused is having like a guest lecturer or like a different professor with like differing viewpoints, and then seeing them both at like the front of the class, kind of like hashing things out and like steel manning each other's arguments and like agreeing on things instead of the usual like straw man you see. I think that kind of like model behavior for like a really good debate, basically, or a conversation, I think that would be really helpful for students to see, and then they can basically recreate it at the student level. And the third thing I'd like to see is just like a 50 feet like dry erase board at like the center of like every campus for like civil discourse, and then just have like any like random interesting questions that people are like passionate about, that there can be like reasonable disagreement on, and then just have like a bunch of people just write down thoughts they have or arguments they have on this board on both sides. And I think that basically just stands as like a monument to how people can have civil disagreement, and the people on campus can have differing views than you, but like they're still all, at the end of the day, most of them are just really friendly, awesome, curious people, and that people with differing opinions to you aren't necessarily a threat to your life or your ideology. That's the whole point of of Canada sometimes, I think, is like the pluralism and like the fact that people with different ideas and different ideologies can most of the time live together in pretty good harmony. And yeah, maybe some ideas are a threat to democracy, but I feel like I'd rather see those ideas hashed out on like a dry erase board on a campus rather than like some algorithmically controlled social media sphere, which is a different conversation entirely. My core contention, and what I really want you to take away from this video, is that universities and education are going to be under a level of attack that we really haven't seen before. And what with Trump threatening to abolish the Department of Education and withhold public funding from universities that he thinks are too woke or too liberal, which is basically all of them. And these systems do deserve critique, obviously, as I've mentioned here, but all the critique I feel like I'm hearing just come from like the worst places online. So I really just think we need stronger, better critiques from the left and better advocates for reform instead of abolition to rise up and really battle out in the public discourse. If you enjoyed this, or if you share some kind of critique or compliment of universities and the education system at large, I'd love to hear what you think I missed or what you think I got right. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'm gonna freeze my hands off if I don't put my gloves back on.